The small Café El Jardín on the main street of San Miguel de Allende had a cozy early morning atmosphere. Catalina Ortega Vargas took her favorite table by the window, overlooking an old church with walls darkened by time. Ramon, a waiter who had known her for 3 years, silently placed a cup of black coffee without sugar in front of her, just the way she liked it. Catalina opened her laptop and stared at the blank document for a few minutes. Starting a new book was always difficult for her, even though she already had 5 successful novels under her belt. She took a sip of coffee and plunged into her work, her fingers running quickly over the keyboard. The quiet music coming from the cafe's speakers was interrupted only by the clinking of dishes and the muffled conversations of the few customers. Catalina liked to write here. At home, there were often distractions, and here she could fully concentrate on her thoughts. Her musings were interrupted by a polite cough. Looking up, she saw a man of 45 holding her latest book, Shadows of the Past. "I'm sorry to disturb you, Señora Ortega," he said with a slight excitement in his voice. "I am Angel Montoya, and I am a great admirer of your work. Would you mind signing my copy?" Catalina smiled affably. She had grown accustomed to such requests over the years of her writing career, though each time she felt a genuine appreciation for her readers. "Of course, it would be my pleasure. How do you sign?" she asked, pulling from her purse the fountain pen her husband had given her last Christmas. "Please write Angel. You know, your last book. It helped me through a very difficult time in my life. Especially the chapter on forgiveness," he faltered, clearly embarrassed by his candor. Catalina wrote warm words of thanks, adding a small wish. Angel thanked her and, clutching the book to his chest, headed for the exit. Moments like this always inspired her, the realization that her words resonated in the hearts of her readers. Back to work, she spent another 2 hours in the cafe, writing the first 3 pages of the new story. The day was slowly picking up, the cafe was filling up with people, and Catalina decided it was time to go home. Their house was in an upscale neighborhood of the city, among similarly large mansions surrounded by manicured gardens. As Catalina parked her silver Mercedes at the entrance, she noticed that the windows in her husband's office were lit up, which meant that Rogelio was working from home. She was greeted in the spacious hallway by Carmela, their elderly housekeeper who had been with them for 8 years. "Señora Catalina, dinner will be ready in 20 minutes. Señor Rogelio asked for it to be served in his office," she informed her as she accepted Catalina's bag. "Thank you, Carmela. I'll go up to his office." Climbing the wide staircase to the second floor, Catalina stopped in front of the office door and knocked lightly. Hearing the familiar "come in," she opened the door. Rogelio sat behind a massive mahogany desk, piled with papers and folders. His construction company was growing rapidly, bringing in a steady income. Seeing his wife, he stood up and walked over to her, kissing her on the cheek. "How was your morning? Did you manage to write anything?" he asked, putting his arm around her waist. "Yes, did some first drafts. Met a reader, had a very nice conversation." Catalina sat down in the leather chair by the window. "By the way, I wanted to talk to you." Rogelio leaned on the table. "Don't you find that Carmela can't handle all the work anymore? The house is big. The garden requires constant maintenance." Catalina thought for a moment. Indeed, lately she had noticed that Carmela was finding it increasingly difficult to keep up with all the chores. "What do you suggest?" "I think we should hire another housekeeper and a gardener. Carmela could concentrate on the kitchen and the inside of the first floor, while the new housekeeper would take care of the second floor and other duties. The gardener, on the other hand, would take full charge of the grounds." The suggestion sounded reasonable. Catalina nodded. "You're right, it's getting hard for Carmela. But where to find staff? You know how important it is to find reliable people." "Don't worry about that," Rogelio smiled. "I have several candidates in mind. I'll take care of the matter personally." At that moment, Carmela knocked on the door, announcing that lunch was served. They went down to the dining room where a set table awaited them. Catalina noted how impeccably Carmela had set the table. The new staff would have to live up to a high standard. Over lunch, they discussed business, Rogelio's new housing project, and Catalina's beginning work on a new book. The sun flooded the dining room with warm light through the tall windows, creating a cozy atmosphere. "I'll think about the candidates for a week," Rogelio said, blotting his lips with a napkin. "I'll conduct interviews, check references. You don't have to worry about that." Catalina agreed, though somewhere in the back of her mind a slight unease prickled. She was used to being personally involved in all important matters concerning their home. But Rogelio had always been a good manager and a good staffer. His company had prospered largely because of that quality. After lunch, Catalina went up to her office, a small, cozy room where she worked on her books when she wasn't out at the cafe. The walls were lined with bookcases, and by the window stood an antique desk she'd bought at an auction 5 years ago. She opened her laptop, intending to get on with her work, but her thoughts returned to the upcoming changes to the house. Outside the window, the day was slowly slipping toward dusk, the first day of a new chapter in their lives, though Catalina didn't know it yet. She just worked on her book, glancing occasionally at the garden where Carmela hung the laundry, and thought about how their routine would change with the new people in the house. It had been a week since the conversation about hiring new staff. Rogelio had acted quickly and decisively. He had set aside one of his offices on the first floor for interviews. Catalina noticed different people coming into their home over the course of several days. She watched this process with a mixed sense of curiosity and concern. That morning, Catalina was working in the home office when she heard the doorbell ring. Carmela hurried to open it, and soon the sound of footsteps and muffled voices echoed through the house. Catalina went to the window and saw a tall, middle-aged man heading toward Rogelio's office. His tanned face and calloused hands made him look like a man accustomed to physical labor. An hour later, Rogelio walked up to his wife's office, beaming with satisfaction. "I think I've found us an excellent gardener. Esteban Valdez is a professional with 15 years of experience. He's worked on several large estates and has excellent references." "Are you sure he's reliable?" Catalina asked, setting aside her laptop. "Absolutely. I've checked all his credentials and contacted previous employers. He'll start next week." Rogelio sat down on the edge of the desk. "And another candidate for the housekeeper position is coming in this afternoon. A very capable girl, they say." Catalina nodded, returning to her work on the book. The day progressed slowly as Carmela prepared lunch. The trees rustled their leaves in the garden, and the distant noise of the city came from the open window. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the doorbell rang again. Catalina was just coming down the stairs when Carmela let a young girl in. Marisol Escalante looked flawless. Dark hair neatly gathered into a ponytail, a simple dark dress emphasized her slender figure. She held herself with surprising grace for her age and social standing. "Good afternoon, Senora," the girl said hello, meeting Catalina's gaze. There was a confidence in her large brown eyes that seemed slightly misplaced to Catalina. Rogelio came out of the office and, after greeting the girl, invited her to the interview. Catalina noticed her husband's gaze lingering on Marisol's figure for a split second, but immediately dismissed the thought. It was just her imagination. While waiting for the interview to end, Catalina walked into the kitchen where Carmela was making her favorite lemon pie. "What do you think of the new girl, Carmela?" Catalina asked, taking a seat at the kitchen table. The elderly housekeeper froze for a moment, then said slowly, "Too young and pretty for this kind of work, Senora, but that is only my opinion." Catalina smiled understandingly. Carmela had always been astute in her judgments of people. The interview lasted an unusually long time. When Marisol finally left the office, Her cheeks flushed slightly, and there was a triumphant glint in her eyes. Rogelio walked her to the door, then headed straight for his wife. "She's perfect," he declared excitedly. "Young, energetic, has experience in good houses. I think she and Carmela will work well together." Catalina looked at her husband. "Don't you think she's a bit too spectacular for a housekeeper?" "Come on," Rogelio waved his hand. "It's her professional qualities that matter. She'll start working alongside Esteban next week." The next few days passed in preparation for the new employees. Carmela showed unusual zeal in cleaning. She seemed eager to demonstrate that she was doing an excellent job. Catalina noticed how nervous the older woman was, though she tried not to show it. At 8 o'clock sharp on Monday morning, the new employees began their duties. Esteban went straight to the garden, where he began to survey the area and draw up a work plan. Marisol changed into a dark dress with a white apron and began to familiarize herself with the house under Carmela's supervision. Catalina watched from the window of her office as Esteban methodically walked around the garden, making notes in a small notebook. His movements were confident and professional. He clearly knew his business. At one point he looked up and, noticing Catalina, nodded respectfully. Inside the house, Marisol was surprisingly nimble. She quickly memorized the layout of the rooms, listened carefully to Carmela's directions, and asked the right questions. Catalina bumped into her several times in the corridors. The girl always smiled welcomingly and respectfully gave way. In the evening, Rogelio returned from the office earlier than usual, obviously wanting to know how the first day had gone. He asked Esteban in detail about the plans for the garden, then had a long talk with Marisol about her first impressions. Catalina noticed how attentively her husband listened to the girl, how approvingly he nodded in response to her suggestions for organizing the work. At dinner, Rogelio did not hide his satisfaction. "I told you I would find the right people. Esteban is a true professional, and Marisol is just right for this kind of work." Catalina remained silent, stirring her tea with her spoon. Something elusive was bothering her, but she couldn't pinpoint the exact cause of her unease. Before going to bed, brushing her hair in front of the mirror, Catalina reflected on the changes that had taken place. The house did need extra hands. That much was obvious. Esteban gave the impression of a reliable worker. But Marisol, in the girl felt some hidden power, ambitiousness, which alerted Catalina. Rogelio was already lying in bed reviewing documents. He looked content and relaxed. "You know," he said without taking his eyes off the papers, "I think we made the right decision with the new staff. You'll see, things will get better soon." Catalina lay down next to him, turning off the bedside lamp. The darkness made it especially poignant that there were new people in their home, strangers who would inevitably affect their lives. She closed her eyes, trying to push the unwelcome thoughts away. After all, they were just hired help, nothing more. It had been a month since the new workers had arrived at the house. Esteban had completely transformed the garden, trimmed the overgrown bushes, planted new flowers, tidied up the paths. Catalina often saw him at work through the window of her office, methodical, focused, almost imperceptible. Marisol, too, quickly settled in. She performed her duties perfectly, always showing up on time and looking impeccable in her uniform. However, something in her demeanor began to change. Catalina couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was, but she found more and more small details to be troubling. One morning, on her way down to breakfast, Catalina heard laughter coming from the dining room. Marisol was setting the table, and Rogelio, already dressed for work, was standing leaning against the doorway, saying something obviously amusing. The girl laughed with her head slightly thrown back, and her hands arranging the utensils moved with exaggerated grace. "Good morning," Catalina said as she entered the dining room. The laughter instantly died down. "Good morning, dear," Rogelio walked over to his wife, kissing her on the cheek. "I was telling Marisol a funny story about our new contractor." Marisol quickly finished setting the table and, bowing her head, retired to the kitchen. Catalina noticed how her hips swayed as she walked and how her husband's gaze lingered on her figure for a split second. At breakfast, Rogelio was unusually lively, talking about the plans for the day, joking. Catalina answered one-word answers, watching Marisol appear in the dining room with a pot of coffee or fruit, each time finding an excuse to linger a little longer than necessary. After her husband left for work, Catalina went up to her office. Work on the new book was slower than usual. Her thoughts kept returning to the morning scene. There was a knock at the door. It was Carmela with tea. "Señora," the elderly housekeeper began, setting out the tea things, "don't you find that Marisol has become overly free-spirited?" Catalina looked at Carmela carefully. "What do you mean?" "She often lingers in Señor Rogelio's office during cleaning time, and talks to him not as a servant should." Catalina felt her shoulders tense, so she wasn't the only one noticing these changes. "I'll talk to her," Catalina replied, though an inner voice told her that talking might only make things worse. The day stretched on slowly. Catalina went downstairs several times on various pretexts, noting where Marisol was and what she was doing. The girl was doing her job flawlessly, but there was a special fluidity in her movements, as if she was constantly preparing to go on stage. In the evening, Rogelio returned later than usual. At dinner, he was thoughtful and absent-minded, barely touched his food. Catalina watched her husband absent-mindedly twirl his wine glass in his hands. "Rough day?" she asked. "Yes, lots of work with a new project," he replied without looking up. "By the way, I'll be late tomorrow too. Important meeting with investors." Marisol, who was clearing the table, touched Rogelio's hand as if unintentionally, taking the empty plate. He flinched, but didn't show it. Catalina pretended not to notice this fleeting gesture. The next morning, Catalina decided not to go to the cafe, but to work at home. She could hear Marisol humming something as she cleaned the rooms on the second floor. Her voice, young and tinkling, echoed through the house, creating a strange contrast to Catalina's heavy mood. Around noon, the phone rang. Rogelio said he couldn't make it to lunch. Catalina went down to the dining room where a table set for one person was waiting for her. Marisol, serving the soup, smiled her usual polite smile, but in the girl's eyes Catalina noticed something resembling triumph. After lunch, Catalina went out into the garden needing some fresh air. Esteban was working at the far hedge, trimming the overgrown ivy. When he saw her, he said a respectful hello and returned to his work. His presence was reassuring for some reason. He was reliable and without falsehood. "How is your work going, Esteban?" Catalina asked, stopping beside the gardener. "Fine, señora. The garden requires a lot of attention, but I like my job," he replied without interrupting his work. "And how do you work with the others?" she inquired cautiously. Esteban froze for a moment, then slowly said, "Carmela is a fine woman, very experienced, and Marisol," he stammered, "she's good at her job." In his voice, Catalina caught the same tension she felt herself. So she and Carmela weren't the only ones noticing something amiss. In the evening, Rogelio returned late. He smelled of expensive whiskey. Apparently, the meeting with the investors had been a success. He was unusually lively, talked a lot about his work and plans for the future. Catalina listened, half-listened, noting how his manner of speech had changed. It was as if he was playing the role of a successful businessman in front of an invisible audience. At night, Catalina could not sleep for a long time. Lying in the dark, she listened to her husband's breathing and thought about how imperceptibly the atmosphere in their home is changing. Marisol, who had appeared a month ago as an ordinary housekeeper, was gradually turning into an invisible threat to their family peace. The next morning, coming down for breakfast, Catalina heard a muffled conversation from her husband's study. The door was ajar, and she saw Marisol leaning over Rogelio's desk, showing him something in the papers. Her hand rested on the back of his chair, almost touching his shoulder. They spoke quietly, almost in a whisper, and this intimacy of the moment struck Catalina more than the overt flirtation. She coughed deliberately loudly as she entered the office. Marisol straightened with a nonchalant look. "Good morning, Senora. I was showing Senor Rogelio the list of necessary household purchases." "You can pass the list through Carmela next time," Catalina replied coldly. Rogelio defiantly delved into the papers, pretending to be completely absorbed in his work. Marisol slipped quietly out of the office, leaving behind a light scent of perfume, too expensive for a housekeeper. The morning was overcast. Catalina sat in her favorite cafe, but work on the book did not go on. She absent-mindedly stirred the cooled coffee, watching the sparse raindrops on the window. At a nearby table, a young couple were passionately discussing their plans for the future, their happy voices only adding to her anxiety. "Catalina?" A familiar voice snapped her out of her reverie. Standing in front of the table was Paulina Rodriguez, her longtime friend. "Paulina, it's been so long since we've seen each other." Catalina was genuinely pleased to see her. "Won't you sit down?" Paulina lowered herself into the chair opposite, looking at her friend carefully. "You seem tense. Is something wrong?" Catalina hesitated a moment. They had been friends with Paulina for over 15 years, since university. If anyone could understand her worries, it was her. "We have a new housekeeper," Catalina began. "Young, beautiful." "And your husband is showing interest in her?" Paulina asked shrewdly. Catalina nodded, feeling relieved that she could finally share her experiences. At first it was just glances, casual touches. Now she's constantly finding excuses to be around him. And yesterday I caught them in his office. They were standing so close. Paulina frowned. "Why don't you just fire her?" "I brought it up with Rogelio, but he's adamantly against it. Says I'm making it up, that she's a great employee." "Classic situation," Paulina sighed. "And this girl, is she really good at her job?" "That's the thing. She's impeccable in everything, her work, her manners. But there's something lurking behind that flawlessness. I can feel it." They talked for over an hour. Paulina, who worked as a psychologist, listened carefully to all the details and at the end of the conversation said, "You need to have a serious talk with your husband, not about the housekeeper, about your relationship." Catalina returned home after lunch. In the hallway, she ran into Marisol, who was wiping the mirror. The girl was wearing a new dress, still the same dark, form-fitting dress, but fitting her figure impeccably. "Good afternoon, Senora," Marisol said hello. "Senor Rogelio asked me to tell you that it will be late tonight, an important meeting with the partners." Catalina could hear a faint note of superiority in her voice, as if the girl knew something she didn't know herself. Catalina went up to the bedroom to change. On the dressing table, she noticed a bottle of perfume, the same scent she had picked up in her husband's study. She took the bottle in her hands, an expensive French perfume she had never bought. Carmela knocked on the door. "Senora, a courier has come to see you with documents from the publisher." Catalina went downstairs. Indeed, a new contract had to be signed. She walked to her husband's office, the only place where the fax machine stood. Marisol was already there, ostensibly wiping down the bookshelves. Her movements were deliberately slow, as if she was stalling on purpose. "You can go now, Marisol. I'll finish the paperwork myself," Catalina said firmly. The girl left, but her presence seemed to remain in the room, in the light scent of perfume, in the barely noticeable mess on Rogelio's desk, in the man's shirt thrown carelessly on the chair. That evening, When Rogelio finally came home, Catalina decided to take her friend's advice. She waited until her husband had eaten dinner and settled into his study. "We need to talk," she said as she entered the room. Rogelio tore himself away from his laptop. "Is something wrong?" "Yes. I'm worried about us, about our relationship. You've been different lately, aloof, distracted." "You're exaggerating," he tried to smile. "It's just a lot of work, important projects." "It's not just work." Catalina stepped closer. "I see the way you look at Marisol, the way she's hanging around you." Rogelio's face turned rigid. "There you go again. Marisol is just a housekeeper who does her duties well. You're making up things that aren't there." "Really? Where did she get such expensive perfume?" "I found a bottle in the bedroom." "I have no idea. Maybe she's saving up money for perfume. Who cares?" He slammed the laptop shut irritably. "I've had a rough day. I don't want to discuss your fantasies." Catalina felt everything inside clench at his tone. "So it's fantasies? And your late returns, your absent-mindedness, your irritation are fantasies too?" "Stop it." Rogelio stood up. "I'm tired of these baseless accusations. If you don't like Marisol, that's your problem. She stays to work for us, period." He walked out of the office, leaving Catalina alone. She sank slowly into her chair, feeling her familiar world crumble. Marisol's muffled voice came from the hallway. She was discussing something with Rogelio. Their voices sounded too intimate for a conversation between master and servant. The next morning, Catalina awoke early. Rogelio had already left. A note on the nightstand informed her that he had an important meeting out of town. The handwriting was sloppy, hurried. He had always written her detailed, warm messages before. When she came down to breakfast, she saw that Marisol had already set the table. The girl moved through the dining room with a special grace, as if she were dancing. She was wearing a simple black dress, but it fit like a designer outfit. "Senor Rogelio asked me to tell you he'll be back late," Marisol said with a faint smile. "He has an important meeting." "I know," Catalina replied dryly. "He left a note." The day stretched agonizingly slow. Catalina tried to work on her book, but the words wouldn't come together. She walked down to the garden where Esteban was planting new rose bushes. His measured, confident movements were a little soothing. "Beautiful roses," she said, stopping beside the gardener. "Yes, senora. Senor Rogelio chose them personally," Esteban replied, and after a pause added, "along with Marisol. They went to the garden center yesterday." Catalina froze. So there had been no business meeting yesterday. Her husband had gone to pick out roses with the housekeeper. Dozens of similar business meetings had flashed through her mind in recent weeks. The day began with a minor incident. During her morning coffee, Catalina accidentally knocked over a cup on the manuscript she'd been working on the day before. Marisol was immediately on hand with napkins, but her helpfulness only served to increase Catalina's irritation. After breakfast, Catalina went up to her bedroom to prepare for her meeting with her editor. She opened her jewelry box, intending to pull out her favorite sapphire bracelet, a gift from Rogelio for their 5th wedding anniversary. Her hand froze over the open lid. The bracelet was not in its usual place. Catalina methodically went through all the jewelry. The bracelet seemed to have vanished. She remembered exactly that she had worn it last week to a literary evening, and then put it in the jewelry box as usual. "Carmela!" she called out to the elderly housekeeper. Carmela appeared almost instantly. "Yes, senora." "Have you seen my sapphire bracelet, the one with the platinum clasp?" Carmela's face reflected genuine concern. "No, senora. I never touch your jewelry, only wipe the box from the outside." "And who has been cleaning the bedroom this week?" Carmela hesitated. "Mostly Marisol. She said you let her do the cleaning on the 2nd floor." Catalina felt her fists clench. She had never given such permission. Moreover, she had always insisted that only Carmela clean the bedroom. At that moment, Marisol appeared in the doorway with a basket of clean linens. "Good morning, Senora. I brought your linens." "Marisol, have you cleaned the bedroom this week?" "Yes, Senora." The girl smiled serenely. "Carmela has been busy preparing for the reception, so I thought I'd help." "Did you see the sapphire bracelet in my jewelry box?" Marisol's face remained impenetrable. "No, Senora. I only wiped the dust. I did not touch your things." Catalina watched the girl carefully. Not a single muscle trembled in her face, but something in her eyes, some undercurrent of gleam, gave away her insincerity. That evening, when Rogelio returned home, Catalina decided to talk to him about the missing piece. "My sapphire bracelet is missing," she said as she entered his office. Rogelio didn't even look up from his papers. "Maybe you just put it somewhere else." "No, it was always in the jewelry box, and I distinctly remember putting it there after the literary evening." "And what are you saying?" "Marisol cleaned the bedroom without my permission." Rogelio finally tore himself away from the papers. "Just don't start that again. Marisol is an honest girl. She was just helping Carmela." "Helping? Don't you find it odd that she always ends up exactly where you are?" "What are you talking about?" "The fact that she specifically volunteered to clean the second floor, about her always hanging around your office, about the fact that you went to pick roses together even though you said you had a business meeting." Rogelio's face darkened. "Are you following me?" "No, it's just that I have eyes, and I can see what's going on in my own house." "In our house," he emphasized. "And I'm not going to let you accuse an honest employee of stealing just because you can't find your bracelet." "Honest?" Catalina grinned bitterly. "Then explain to me where she got the $300 perfume from. Maybe it was a gift, or she's been saving up money. What difference does it make?" "A gift? From whom?" Rogelio stood up from the table. "Stop this interrogation. I'm not going to discuss your baseless suspicions. If the bracelet is really missing, report it to the police, but I won't let you accuse an innocent man." "Innocent?" Catalina stepped closer. "What about the fact that she cleaned the bedroom without permission, that she's always finding excuses to be around you, that she—" "Enough!" Rogelio slapped his palm on the table. "I don't want to hear any more of these accusations. Marisol stays to work for us, period." At that moment, the office door ajar and Marisol herself appeared. "Excuse me, Señor Rogelio, Señora. I brought the evening coffee." Catalina noticed how her husband's expression changed at the girl's appearance. His features softened, his eyes warmed. Marisol gracefully placed the tray on the table, accidentally touching Rogelio's hand. The touch lasted a fraction of a second, but it was more intimate than all the conversations Catalina had had with her husband over the past month. In the evening, lying in bed, Catalina went over the events of the past weeks in her mind. Marisol's appearance had not only changed the atmosphere in the house, it had changed Rogelio himself. He became irritable, impatient, especially in conversations with his wife. But with Marisol, he was invariably polite and attentive, took the time to listen to her suggestions for managing the household, advised on the purchase of flowers for the garden. In the morning, Catalina came down for breakfast earlier than usual. In the kitchen, Carmela was making coffee, her movements slow and careful. "Carmela," Catalina called softly, "you've been working for us for a long time. Tell me what's going on in the house." The elderly woman froze with the Turk in her hand. "Señora, I shouldn't be saying these things, but Marisol, she is not just a housekeeper. She knows what she wants, and she's going after her goal. And Señor Rogelio—" At that moment, Marisol entered the kitchen. She was impeccably dressed, as always, but today Catalina noticed a new gold chain on her, thin, dainty, obviously expensive. "Good morning," the girl said with her usual polite smile. Senor Rogelio asked me to tell you that he won't have breakfast at home today. He has an early meeting. Catalina nodded silently, looking at the gold chain. It was the same one she'd seen a month ago in a jewelry store she'd visited with her husband. Rogelio had looked at it for a long time but hadn't bought anything, at least not in front of her. Saturday morning, Catalina sat at the kitchen table watching Carmela prepare breakfast. Outside the window, a light drizzle drizzled, the drops dripping down the glass, creating bizarre patterns. From the second floor came the sound of a vacuum cleaner as Marisol did her weekly cleaning. Rogelio came down for breakfast unusually early for a day off. He was smooth-shaven and dressed in an expensive tracksuit. He was going to the gym. Lately, he'd been paying special attention to his appearance. "Darling," Catalina began as he sat down at the table, "I want to discuss an idea with you." Rogelio sipped his coffee, looking questioningly at his wife. "I think we should install security cameras in the house," she pronounced, watching his reaction carefully. The hand with the cup froze halfway through. "Cameras? Why?" "After the bracelet went missing, I feel insecure. Besides, it's common practice for big houses like ours." At that moment, Marisol entered the kitchen with a basket of clean laundry. She pretended not to hear the conversation, but Catalina noticed how her shoulders tensed. "That's absurd," Rogelio retorted. "We're not going to turn our house into a prison with video surveillance." "Why do you reject the idea so harshly? It's a matter of security." "Security?" he grinned. "Or your desire to keep tabs on everyone?" Marisol continued to methodically fold the laundry, but Catalina could see how intently the girl was listening to the conversation. "I just want to protect our property," Catalina replied calmly. "After the bracelet went missing—" "There you go again." Rogelio pushed the cup away with irritation. "No one stole anything. You just put the bracelet somewhere and forgot it. And stopped looking for blame among the servants." Catalina noticed the corners of Marisol's lips trembling slightly, a barely perceptible victorious smile. "Good," she said slowly. "Then let's set up cameras only in the common areas, the hall, the living room, the hallways." "No," Rogelio retorted. "I don't want anyone in my house to feel like they're under constant surveillance. It's demeaning to the staff and unpleasant for ourselves." He got up from the table. "I'm late for the gym, and let's close this subject once and for all." Catalina watched her husband hurriedly leave the kitchen. Marisol followed him, holding his freshly laundered gym bag. Their footsteps fell silent in the hallway, but after a few seconds Catalina caught a muffled conversation. They were talking quietly about something at the front door. After her husband left, Catalina went up to her study. Work on the book did not go on. Thoughts constantly returned to the morning conversation. Rogelio's categorical rejection of the cameras only increased her suspicions. There was a cautious knock at the door. Carmela entered with a cup of fresh tea. "Señora," the elderly housekeeper said quietly, "I heard your conversation with Señor Rogelio." "And what do you think, Carmela?" "I think the señor has changed a great deal lately. And that change began with the appearance of Marisol." Catalina looked at the woman appreciatively. "Thank you for not being afraid to tell the truth." After lunch, Catalina went to Paulina's house. Her friend met her in her cozy office where she conducted psychological counseling sessions. "You look troubled," Paulina remarked as she sat her friend down in a chair. Catalina talked about the missing bracelet, her suspicions, and her husband's reaction to the suggestion of installing cameras. "You know," Paulina said thoughtfully, "his abrupt refusal is really alarming. A man with nothing to hide usually doesn't care about cameras." "What should I do?" Paulina was silent for a moment, then said firmly, "Put up the cameras secretly." "What?" "There are many miniature surveillance cameras available now. They can be hidden so that no one will notice. If your suspicions are unfounded, you'll be reassured. If not, You'll get proof." Catalina hesitated. "But is this the right thing to do? Installing cameras secretly from your husband? Is it right to cheat on your wife?" Paulina parried. "Look, I know a good store that sells professional surveillance equipment. The owner is a former client of mine. He'll help you find everything you need." An hour later, they were already in a small store on the outskirts of town. A thin, middle-aged man listened carefully to their request and showed them several options for hidden cameras. "This is our latest model." He handed Catalina a small device slightly larger than a coin. "High-quality footage, including nighttime, built-in motion sensor, recording to a memory card. You can connect it to your phone and view live video." Catalina bought 6 cameras. For the hall, living room, Rogelio's office, dining room, and 2 hallways on the second floor. Paulina helped select the locations for installation, drawing a diagram of the house on a piece of paper. When Catalina returned home, she found an unaccustomed silence. Rogelio still hadn't returned from the gym. Marisol was finishing cleaning the second floor, and Carmela had gone shopping. In the hallway lay the dust rag Marisol had forgotten. Catalina picked it up and smelled the familiar scent of perfume, the same French perfume. So, the girl purposely perfumes even work clothes. In the evening, when everyone dispersed, Catalina sat in the darkness of her office for a long time, looking at the box with cameras. Somewhere in the house echoed the footsteps of Rogelio. He spoke on the phone, and his voice sounded unusually lively. Tomorrow morning he would be leaving for a business meeting, Marisol would be off to the bank, and Carmela would be busy in the kitchen, the perfect time to set up the cameras. Catalina pulled one camera out of the box, twirled it in her hands. The small device felt scaldingly heavy, as if its very presence in the house was already changing the way things were done. She remembered Marisol's triumphant smile, her husband's irritation, his adamant refusal of surveillance cameras. It all added up to a picture she was afraid to see in its entirety, but she had to know the truth. From the hallway came the sound of footsteps, light, feminine this time. Catalina went to the door and peered out cautiously. Marisol had slipped into Rogelio's office without even knocking. She came out a few minutes later, holding some papers in her hands, her face glowing with an unfamiliar satisfaction in the semi-darkness of the corridor. Catalina clutched the camera in her hand. Tomorrow she would find out what was happening in her own home. Tomorrow a new phase of this story would begin, and she had to be ready for whatever truth these little lenses would reveal. The morning turned out to be surprisingly suitable for the plan she had in mind. Rogelio had indeed left for his meeting early in the morning, having had a hasty coffee. Marisol, as promised the day before, had excused herself to the bank before lunch. Carmela was busy preparing an elaborate lunch. Rogelio had warned that he was bringing an important client. Catalina waited until the house was quiet and pulled out the box of cameras. She went over the layout diagram she had drawn yesterday with Paulina one more time. She decided to place the first camera in the hallway. An antique vase on a tall stand was perfect. The small lens, hidden among the carved patterns, was completely invisible. She placed the second camera in the living room, skillfully camouflaged among the indoor plants. Her hands trembled slightly as she attached the device to the inside of a broad ficus leaf. From the hallway came Carmela's singing. The elderly housekeeper always hummed as she prepared elaborate meals. Installing the camera in the dining room took more time. She had to find a place where the entire table could be viewed, but the device would remain invisible. In the end, Catalina chose a niche with decorative plates. The small camera was perfectly hidden between the antique porcelain. On the second floor, the work went faster. She was already accustomed to the installation process. One camera was placed in the corridor, disguising it behind the baguette of an antique painting. The second, at the staircase, hiding among the decorative moldings. The last, sixth camera was to be installed in Rogelio's office. Catalina paused in front of the door. She rarely came in here when her husband was away. Inside, everything was still as sterilely clean as it had been after Marisol's morning cleaning. The desk was in perfect order, all the folders stacked, not a single extra piece of paper. Catalina had chosen a spot for the camera on the bookcase, among the collection of miniature figurines that Rogelio brought back from his business trips. When she finished setting it up, she returned to her office and launched an app on her phone. 6 small windows showed different parts of the house. The images were clear, the sound recorded perfectly. She tested it by walking through all the rooms with a soft conversation on her phone. Around noon, Marisol returned. Catalina watched through the camera in the hall as the girl entered the house, impeccably dressed with a new designer handbag in hand. For a trip to the bank, she was clearly dressed a little too smartly. "Señora," Marisol peered into Catalina's office. "I'm back and I'll get right to work. Is there anything that needs to be done first?" "No. Proceed on your normal schedule," Catalina replied, trying to keep her voice sounding natural. The day ran its course. Catalina was writing here and there, glancing at the screen of her phone. Marisol was indeed doing the usual things, dusting, folding laundry, helping Carmela. But now Catalina noticed something she had never seen before, how the girl lingered in Rogelio's office longer than necessary, how she scrutinized the things on his desk, how she ran her hand along the back of his chair. After lunch, Rogelio returned, alone without the promised client. He looked tired and irritated. "Meeting's off," he tossed back at his wife's questioning look. "I'll work from home." Catalina noticed Marisol perk up at his appearance. Through the camera in the hallway, the girl could be seen hurrying into Rogelio's office with a cup of fresh coffee. She stayed there longer than usual. Catalina could hear through the headphones their muffled conversation, too quiet to make out the words. In the evening, reviewing the day's records, Catalina noticed one thing. Marisol had gone into their bedroom, even though today was not the day for cleaning the upper rooms. The girl had spent about 5 minutes there, and a camera in the hallway recorded her walking out, hiding something in her apron pocket. For the next few days, Catalina lived as if in 2 realities. In one, she was an ordinary housewife and writer, working on her book, going about her daily business, socializing with her husband and the servants. In the other, she was a keen observer watching every movement in the house through the lenses of hidden cameras. The recordings confirmed her worst suspicions. Marisol spent far more time in Rogelio's office than it took to clean. They often talked in low voices, standing closer than master and maid should. On one occasion, the camera caught Rogelio handing the girl an envelope which she immediately tucked into her pocket. On Friday, Rogelio announced at dinner, "It's my birthday in 2 weeks. I want to have a small celebration at home, invite close friends and business partners." Catalina nodded. "Okay, I'll take care of the organization." "Don't worry about it," he said quickly. "Marisol has already volunteered to help with the preparations. She has excellent taste and experience in organizing such events." Through the camera in the dining room, Catalina could see Marisol smiling contentedly as she cleared the table. Her husband's birthday party was another opportunity for the girl to show herself indispensable. In the evening, while reviewing the day's records, Catalina noticed something strange. Marisol had gone several times into the dressing room next to the bedroom, where Rogelio's personal belongings were kept. Once she came out of there with a box, which she took to her room in the maid's annex. Catalina realized that the denouement was approaching. Her husband's birthday will be an important point in the story. She felt it with all her writerly instincts. All that remained was to watch and wait, gathering evidence of what was happening in her own home. Rogelio's birthday was a week away. Catalina noticed Marisol conferring with him more and more about the upcoming party, guest lists, menus, decorating the house. The girl showed a surprising familiarity with the organization of social events, which only increased Catalina's suspicions about her past. In the morning, Catalina went to the jewelry store to choose a gift for her husband. She had long looked at a gold watch of a famous Swiss brand. Rogelio had stopped by the store window several times looking at this particular model. The salesman, an elderly man in an elegant suit, took the watch out of the showcase. "Excellent choice, Senora Ortega. This model is a favorite among successful businessmen. Top-grade gold, Swiss movement, 5-year warranty." Catalina examined the watch carefully. It was perfect for Rogelio, a classic design with a touch of luxury, just his style. The price was impressive, but she wanted to give a special gift. "I'll take them," she said, "and have them packaged in a gift box." Back home, she went up to the bedroom and hid the watch in the nightstand by the bed. Through the cameras, she could see Marisol bustling downstairs, hanging fabric swatches for tablecloths and napkins. The girl ran into Rogelio's office every now and then, consulting with him on every little detail. Catalina sat down at her laptop to review the camera footage from the last few days. On one of the tapes, she noticed Marisol taking a small object out of her purse and hiding it in her apron pocket. This happened just after she returned from another trip to the bank. In the evening, Rogelio came home later than usual. He looked tired but satisfied. "How are the preparations for the feast going?" Catalina asked over dinner. "Fine. Marisol is organizing everything beautifully," he replied, blotting his lips with a napkin. "She has an amazing knack for this sort of thing." Catalina noticed the girl cleaning up the dishes smile slightly at the praise. At night, when Rogelio was already asleep, Catalina went down to the office to check the cameras. She noticed the footage from the afternoon. Marisol was checking the drawers of Rogelio's desk when she thought no one could see. The girl was looking for something, methodically going through folders of documents. The next day, Catalina decided to check her nightstand, where the clock lay. Opening the drawer, she was relieved to find the gift box in place. But something struck her as odd. The box was standing at a slightly different angle. She turned on the hallway camera footage and scrolled back a few hours. Here was Marisol entering the bedroom with an armful of clean linens. Instead of spreading it out right away, she heads to the nightstand. Catalina held her breath as she watched the girl carefully open the drawer and pull out a box of watches. The footage clearly showed Marisol opening the box, scrutinizing the watch, then pulling out her phone and taking a few pictures. She then carefully puts everything back in place and starts folding laundry as if nothing had happened. Catalina checks the other cameras. That same day, Marisol stayed in Rogelio's office for a long time, showing him something on her phone. The sound wasn't clear enough to make out the entire conversation, but Catalina heard a few phrases clearly. "She bought these this morning," Marisol was saying. "Are you sure they're the right ones?" Rogelio asked. "Yes, that's the exact model. I took pictures." After that conversation, Rogelio called somewhere, speaking softly, looking back at the door often. And an hour later, Marisol left again for the bank, returning only for the evening. At dinner, Rogelio was unusually silent. He hardly touched his food, thinking about something. Catalina noticed how he and Marisol exchanged quick glances as the girl changed plates. The next morning, Catalina decided to check her watch once more. Opening the box, she took a long look at the golden dial. Something seemed subtly different, though she couldn't tell exactly what it was. She took the receipt out of her purse and checked the model number it matched, but her gut told her something was wrong. Catalina turned on the hallway camera footage from the last 24 hours. After last night's dinner, Marisol had gone into the bedroom one more time, opened the nightstand again, but this time she pulled something out of her apron pocket and put it in the drawer. Catalina went cold. She scrutinized the clock once more. Now she noticed. The movement ticked a little differently, not as softly and evenly as it had in the store. It was a skillful fake, but a fake nonetheless. At that moment, Marisol entered the bedroom with the vacuum cleaner. "Excuse me, Senora, I thought you had already left. I usually do my cleaning at this time." "That's okay. I was just leaving," Catalina replied, discreetly tucking her watch away in her nightstand. As she walked down the stairs, she heard the vacuum cleaner turn on upstairs. Through the camera, she saw Marisol, after making sure she was alone, pull out her cell phone and call someone. The conversation was short. "It's all set." She didn't notice anything. It was 3 days until her birthday. Catalina felt that something else had to happen in that time. She was scrutinizing every movement in the house through the cameras, recording every conversation, every look. Marisol now spent almost all of her time preparing for the holiday. She was making lists, calling vendors, making arrangements with the caterers. But Catalina noticed how, in between, the girl kept watching her movements, especially when she was near the bedroom. In the evening, Catalina called Paulina. "I need your help. I want to show you some records." "Sure," replied her friend. "Come over tomorrow morning. Just please be careful. If what you suspect is true, they might suspect something." It was 2 days until Rogelio's birthday. Catalina sat in Paulina's office showing her friend the surveillance footage. The laptop screen clearly showed all of Marisol's strange activities, her visits to the bedroom, her conversations with Rogelio, the clock switch. "They're definitely up to something," Paulina said, scrutinizing the recordings. "But we need hard evidence, something that can't be explained by chance or coincidence." "I sense the denouement is near," Catalina replied, rubbing her temples absent-mindedly. "They've become less cautious, especially Marisol. She hardly hides her triumph anymore." Returning home, Catalina caught an unusual buzz of excitement. Marisol was supervising the workers who were setting up the holiday decorations in the living room. The girl was dressed in an expensive new suit that would have suited a hotel manager more than a housekeeper. "Senora," she addressed Catalina with a faintly condescending smile, "we are almost finished with the decorations. Senor Rogelio has already approved all the details." Catalina nodded silently and went up to her office. Turning on the monitor, she began reviewing the footage from the time she had been at Paulina's. On one of the cameras, she saw Rogelio come home earlier than usual and head straight to his office. A few minutes later, Marisol walked in. Catalina turned up the volume. At first they discussed the details of the upcoming holiday, but then the conversation took a different turn. "Are you sure she didn't suspect anything?" Rogelio asked, stepping closer to the girl. "Absolutely. She didn't even notice the watch switch," Marisol laughed. "Can you imagine? She bought such an expensive watch and she can't tell the difference between the real one and the fake." "Quiet." Rogelio looked back at the door. "Not so loud." But Marisol seemed to have lost all caution. She walked up to Rogelio closely. "Soon it won't matter anymore. After your birthday, everything will change." Catalina watched her husband pull the girl to him as their lips met in a long kiss. She mechanically pressed the record button, even though the cameras already captured every moment. Carmela knocked on the office door. "Senora Paulina is here to see you." Catalina turned off the monitor and went downstairs. Paulina was standing in the hallway holding a folder with some paperwork. "I looked through all the records more carefully and noticed something interesting." They went upstairs to Catalina's office. Paulina pulled some printed footage out of the folder. "Look at these dates and times. Marisol regularly enters your house through the back door late at night when you're already asleep, and leaves in the morning." Catalina turned on the monitor and opened the records for the past week. Indeed, almost every night the camera at the back door recorded Marisol slipping into the house around 11 o'clock at night. "Wait," Catalina quickly switched cameras. "Now I'm going to show you something." She turned on the footage from Rogelio's office from an hour ago. Paulina watched the kissing scene in silence, then said quietly, "Now, You have irrefutable proof." At that moment, voices came from downstairs. Rogelio and Marisol were discussing the table arrangements for the party. Catalina turned on the camera in the living room. They were standing at the large dining table, leaning over the seating plan. From the outside, it might have looked like the master of the house was simply discussing the details with the servants, but now Catalina noticed every intimate gesture, every surreptitious glance. "What are you going to do?" Paulina asked. "I'm going to wait until my birthday," Catalina replied firmly. "Since they're preparing some kind of surprise, I'll prepare my own too." That evening, reviewing the notes more carefully, Catalina noticed another strange detail. After the kiss in the study, Marisol pulled some sort of small package out of her purse and handed it to Rogelio. He quickly tucked it away in a desk drawer. It was impossible to see what it was through the camera, but Catalina suspected it had something to do with the clock swap. The next morning, Catalina awoke to the sounds of work in the house. Flowers had been brought in to decorate the living room. Marisol was supervising the florists, arranging the gorgeous bouquets throughout the first floor. She moved through the house with the confidence of a hostess, giving orders left and right. Catalina went up to her office and turned on the security footage from the night before. As she expected, around 11, Marisol slipped into the house through the back door. But this time she didn't head for Rogelio's bedroom, but for the dressing room. The camera in the hallway recorded the girl pulling some clothes and a bag out of the closet. Catalina checked the cameras several times throughout the day. Marisol was everywhere, supervising the preparations for the party, arranging the furniture, checking the service. Several times she entered Rogelio's office, and each time they conferred quietly about something, standing impermissibly close to each other. In the evening, Rogelio announced that he had a business dinner and would be back late. Catalina pretended to believe it, but turned on the cameras as soon as he left. An hour later, Marisol left the house as well. Catalina switched cameras trying to follow where they went, but their cars quickly disappeared from sight. Around midnight, the camera at the back door recorded their return. They entered the house together, holding hands, no longer hiding their relationship. Catalina watched them climb the stairs to Rogelio's bedroom as the door closed. She saved all the recordings on a separate flash drive. Tomorrow, at the birthday party, all the masks would be ripped off. She would show the guests the true face of her husband and his mistress. But first, she had one more thing to check. She had little doubt that the story of the watch was not over. The morning of Rogelio's birthday began with a bustle. The house was filled with people. Waiters were arranging dishes. Florists were adding the finishing touches to floral arrangements. Catering staff were preparing hors d'oeuvres. Marisol led the whole process with the look of a professional event organizer. Catalina watched through cameras from her office. On the footage from earlier that morning, she saw Marisol slip back into their bedroom. The girl went straight to the nightstand where the clock was, pulled it out, and replaced it with something else. She hid the original box in her apron pocket. Carmela knocked on the door. "Señora, your dress has been brought to you from the dry cleaners." Catalina thanked the elderly housekeeper. For tonight she had chosen a dark blue silk dress, elegant and austere. She purposely refused the usual bright outfits. Tonight she needed armor, not jewelry. Around noon, Rogelio arrived to check on the preparations. He looked unusually pleased, glancing at his watch every now and then. Catalina knew the reason for his impatience. Through the cameras she had seen Marisol showing him the real gold watch hidden in her room. "Everything is going beautifully," he said, hugging his wife. "Marisol has outdone herself with the organization." "Yes, she's trying very hard," Catalina replied, gently releasing herself from his embrace. After lunch, the dress rehearsal for the evening began. Marisol checked every detail, from the arrangement of the tables to the sequence in which the food would be served. She was dressed in an elegant black dress, more like an evening gown than a servant's uniform. "Signora," she addressed Catalina with poorly concealed superiority, "I have finalized the guest list. 32 people have confirmed their attendance." Catalina took the list. Among the names were Rogelio's business associates, their mutual friends, and several well-known people in town. Marisol was clearly intent on making this evening a significant event. At 4 in the afternoon, Paulina arrived. She brought her laptop and an external hard drive. "I've prepared all the tapes," she said quietly as she went up to Catalina's office. "They're sorted by date. I've put the most important moments in a separate folder." They checked the equipment to show the videos. Catalina had arranged in advance for technicians to set up a large screen in the living room, ostensibly for the presentation of the birthday boy's photos. At 5 o'clock, the first guests began to arrive. Marisol met them in the lobby, escorted them to the living room, led the waiters serving champagne. She moved with the grace of a socialite, not a housekeeper. Catalina stood beside her husband, accepting congratulations and gifts. She noticed several of the guests watching Marisol in surprise. Her behavior was clearly outside the normal duties of a maid. "What an unusual housekeeper you have," the wife of one of Rogelio's partners remarked. "More like a professional event organizer." "Yes, she's very capable," Rogelio replied, and Catalina caught a note of pride in his voice. By 6 o'clock, the living room was full of people. Soft music was playing, waiters were serving hors d'oeuvre, and the air was filled with lively conversation. Marisol fluttered between the guests, making sure everyone was comfortable. Catalina went up to her office ostensibly to check on the final details of the presentation. In reality, she turned on the cameras. On one of the monitors, she saw Marisol go into the maid's room and pull a package out of the closet. There was a real clock in there. A gala dinner was scheduled for 7 o'clock. The guests began to be seated at the large table in the dining room. Catalina took her seat next to her husband. Marisol, instead of joining the rest of the servants, continued to direct the proceedings as if she were the unspoken mistress of the house. "Your attention, please," she announced, raising her glass. "We have a special surprise waiting for us after dinner." Catalina noticed Marisol glancing meaningfully at Rogelio. They were clearly preparing some sort of joint performance, unaware of the surprise the lady of the house had in store for them. The dinner passed in a relaxed atmosphere. The guests praised the excellent organization, exquisite dishes, impeccable service. Rogelio glowed with pleasure now and then, glancing at Marisol, who directed the serving of food with the look of an experienced steward. "What a lovely evening," said an elderly lady sitting next to Catalina, the wife of one of Rogelio's oldest partners. "But, my dear, is it just me, or is your housekeeper behaving somewhat strange?" Catalina smiled softly. "Don't worry, it will clear up soon." After the main courses, Marisol announced a short break before dessert. The guests moved to the living room where a screen had been set up for the presentation. Catalina noticed the girl hurrying to her room, obviously to get her watch. "And now," Rogelio announced loudly, raising his glass, "it's time for the presents." Catalina looked at her watch. It was exactly 8 in the evening, the perfect time to begin her presentation. She nodded to Paulina, who discreetly took a seat at the laptop connected to the projector. A festive atmosphere prevailed in the living room. The guests were seated in comfortable armchairs, holding glasses of champagne. Marisol glided elegantly between them, whispering instructions to the waiters. She was wearing a new piece of jewelry, a dainty gold chain that Catalina had seen earlier in a jewelry store. Rogelio stood in the center of the room, accepting congratulations and gifts. His face lit up with pleasure, especially when his gaze fell on Marisol. Catalina noticed the girl discreetly touch the pocket of her apron several times, where a box containing a real watch lay. "And now," Marisol announced, stepping forward, "it's time for a very special gift." Catalina felt her shoulders tense. She knew what was about to happen. The girl would pull out the switched watches, play out a whole performance in front of her guests. Paulina, who was sitting at her laptop, looked questioningly at her friend. "Wait." Catalina rose from her seat. "Before we get to the presents, I'd like to show a little presentation. I've been preparing it especially for this evening." Rogelio looked at his wife in surprise. "A presentation? You didn't say anything about it." "I wanted to surprise you," Catalina smiled. "Paulina, please turn on the first file." A security camera image appeared on the large screen. It was footage from Rogelio's office from 3 days ago. The video showed Marisol entering the office where Rogelio was already in. Their conversation, their embrace, their kiss, everything was clearly visible. There was dead silence in the room. Some of the guests sighed convulsively. Marisol froze with her mouth ajar, still holding her hand in the pocket of her apron where her watch lay. "What is it?" Rogelio asked hoarsely. "Where did this video come from?" "Oh, it's just the beginning," Catalina replied calmly. "Paulina, next file, please." The footage from the bedroom appeared on the screen. Marisol sneaking over to the nightstand, pulling out a box of watches, taking a picture of them on her phone. Then her conversation with Rogelio in the study, where they were discussing the switch. "Turn that off right now." Rogelio jumped up from his seat. "Why?" Catalina turned to the guests. "Isn't it interesting to watch the housekeeper steal a gift and replace it with a fake? How she sneaks into the house at night. How she plans this little scam with my husband." Marisol turned pale. She pulled the watch box out of her pocket machine-atically, but immediately hid it back in her pocket. "It's a lie!" she shouted out. "Señor Rogelio, tell them!" But Rogelio was silent, his face covered with red spots. The guests began to whisper, some frankly pointing fingers at Marisol. "Ah, yes," Catalina continued. "I completely forgot about one interesting entry. Paulina?" The video from the camera at the back door appeared on the screen. Rogelio and Marisol returning late at night, holding hands, kissing in the darkness of the hallway. "Catalina, stop it!" Rogelio stepped toward his wife. "You don't understand." "No, you're the one who doesn't understand," she interrupted. "Did you think I wouldn't notice, wouldn't guess, wouldn't see this girl gradually taking my place in the house, how she tries on the role of new mistress?" Marisol suddenly darted toward the exit, but Paulina blocked her way. "Halt! Give back the watch." The girl froze, then slowly pulled the box from her pocket. Her hands trembled as she held it out to Catalina. "Open it," Catalina commanded. "Let everyone see." Marisol opened the box. Inside was a gold watch, the same one Catalina had bought at the store. The real one, not the fake one they planned to give in front of all the guests. "Now show me what's in the nightstand in the bedroom," Catalina continued. "Go get it." Marisol did not move. Then Catalina went upstairs herself and returned a minute later with another box. In it lay a watch, almost an exact replica of the original, but still a fake. "This is what they were planning," Catalina announced to the guests. "Steal my gift and replace it with a fake. Play out a whole spectacle tonight." Rogelio finally found his voice. "It's not what you think." "Really? Then explain to me why your mistress sneaks into our house at night, why you give her expensive jewelry. Why are you planning together to get rid of me?" The room became so quiet that the ticking of the clock on the wall could be heard. The guests froze, not knowing where to look. Someone quietly headed for the exit. Marisol suddenly cried. "Señor Rogelio promised that after the party we would be together, that he would divorce you, that we would leave here." These words seemed to break the dam. The guests began to hurriedly say goodbye, leaving the house in a hurry. Only Paulina remained standing next to her friend, ready to support her at any moment. In the living room remained only the main participants of the drama: Catalina, Rogelio, Marisol, Paulina, and a few of the closest family friends who did not dare to leave. A heavy tension hung in the air. The waiters quietly removed the unfinished champagne and untouched appetizers, trying to be as inconspicuous as possible. "You've got it all wrong." Rogelio took a step toward his wife. "We can explain everything." "Explain?" Catalina pointed at the screen. "What exactly do you want to explain? Your kissing with the housekeeper, or how you plan to steal and sell the watch?" Marisol had stopped crying and now stood with a defiant look. "Yes, we love each other. So what of it? You've been living like strangers for a long time." Catalina calmly turned to Paulina. "Show me the last tape, the one we made this morning." A new video appeared on the screen. Marisol is in Rogelio's bedroom. She pulls documents out of her purse, spreading them out on the bed. The camera clearly captures the headings. They are divorce papers, already signed by Rogelio, and some sort of property transfer papers. "So this is what you've been up to," Catalina pronounced. "Planning to not only steal the watch, but also take the house." Rogelio turned pale. "Those are personal documents. You had no right to—" "No right? In your own house? A house that, as it turns out, you were going to give to your mistress?" Marisol suddenly laughed, loudly, hysterically. "Yes, it's true. We planned the whole thing. Rogelio promised me a new life, promised me we'd be together. And you, all you did was write your books without noticing how unhappy he was." Catalina slowly approached the girl. "And you then made him happy by your scheming, stealing, lying." "At least I love him truly," Marisol shouted out. "Love?" Catalina turned to the screen. "Paulina, last file." A recording of Marisol's phone call appeared on the screen. The girl stood in the garden holding the phone to her ear. "Everything is going according to plan. As soon as the papers are signed, we'll sell the house and move out. Yes, he believes every word I say. Of course I'm not going to stay with him. We'll get the money and go our separate ways as agreed." Rogelio froze, staring at the screen. His face slowly changed as the meaning of what he was hearing came to him. What does that mean?" He turned to Marisol. "What were you talking about?" The girl took a step back. "It's a montage. She faked the whole thing." "No, dear," Paulina interjected. "This is the original surveillance footage, with the exact date and time, and we have plenty of such footage." Marisol suddenly rushed for the exit, but one of the remaining guests, Attorney Rogelio, blocked her way. "I think you should return everything you've managed to embezzle before you leave." Carmela appeared in the doorway with a small box in her hands. "Señora Catalina, I found this in Marisol's room. It contains jewelry, documents, and your missing bracelet." Catalina nodded. "Thank you, Carmela. You have always been loyal to this house." Rogelio finally found his voice. "Catalina, I didn't know." "Didn't know what?" She turned to her husband. "That she was a thief, or that she was using you. Which is more important, that she betrayed you, or that you betrayed me?" A heavy silence hung in the room. The remaining guests looked around, unsure whether they should leave or stay. "I want you both out of my house," Catalina said firmly. "Immediately." "But," Rogelio began. "No, no buts. Get out, both of you. My lawyer will contact you tomorrow." Marisol was the first to head for the exit. Her head held high, but her gait had already lost its former grace. At the door, she turned around. "You're going to regret this." "No," Catalina replied calmly. "It is you who will regret it, because I'm going to turn over all the records to the police. Theft, fraud, attempted misappropriation of property. I think they'll be interested." Rogelio stood in the center of the room as if he didn't know what was going on. His birthday suit was wrinkled, his tie bunched sideways. "Catalina, let's talk." "It's all said," she pointed to the door. "Go away." He took a few tentative steps toward the exit, then turned around. "My things." I'll pack them up and get them through a lawyer. For now, leave." As the door closed behind Rogelio, the house fell silent. The remaining guests began to quietly say their goodbyes. Paulina approached her friend. "Are you okay?" Catalina looked at the empty living room, at the unfinished champagne glasses, at the gifts stacked orphanously in the corner. "I'm fine," she replied. "It ended exactly the way it was supposed to end." Carmela began clearing the table, her movements quiet and careful, as if she was afraid to disturb the fragile calm of the moment. "You know," Catalina said, looking at the screen where the last frame of the videotape had frozen, "I could sense from the beginning that something was wrong with her. But I didn't want to believe my intuition." Paulina put her arm around her friend's shoulders. "The important thing is that you expose them in time. They could have done a lot more damage." The sound of a car pulling away was heard in the garden. Rogelio and Marisol had finally left the grounds of the house. Esteban, who had been watching silently from the garden, began to lock the gate. Catalina went to the window. The evening was quiet and warm, and the air smelled of the jasmine that Esteban had recently planted.